Imagine a country so vast it spans 11 time zones, a land of frozen rivers and endless forests, of ancient monasteries and fearsome warriors. And yet, in 1682, this country was invisible to Europe. It was medieval. It was forgotten. It was, by Western standards, centuries behind. Then came Peter, 6'8" tall, a man who built a navy with his own hands, who executed his enemies before breakfast and dined with European kings by evening, who took a nation of wooden ploughs and turned it into an empire that would terrify the world for 300 years. This is the story of how Peter the Great didn't just change Russia. He invented it. To understand what Peter achieved, you have to understand what he started with. In 1682, Russia was not an empire, it was a tsardom, a vast, landlocked, deeply conservative state, ruled by tradition and the Orthodox Church. While England was having its glorious revolution and France was building Versailles, Russia's nobility still wore long robes and long beards, untouched by Renaissance, Reformation, or reason. The country had no modern army, no navy at all. Its roads were mud tracks, its educated class was measured in hundreds, not thousands, and its borders? They touched no warm water port, meaning Russia was economically strangled. No sea access meant no trade, no power, no future. Into this world on June 9, 1672, was born Pyotr Alexeyevich Romanov, the 14th child of Tsar Alexis. Nobody expected much from him. History had other plans. Peter's childhood was brutal, even by the standards of the time. At the age of 10, he witnessed the Streltsy Revolt, a military uprising that left members of his family butchered before his eyes in the Kremlin courtyard. The boyars threw their bodies from the palace windows like sacks of grain. Peter watched. He never forgot. Some men are broken by trauma. Peter was forged by it. From that day, he had one obsession: power. Real power, the kind that comes from cannons, warships, and armies that answer only to him. In 1697, Peter did something no Russian ruler had ever done. He left Russia, not as a Tsar, but in disguise. Under the name Pyotr Mikhailov, ship's carpenter, he joined a delegation of 250 people, the Grand Embassy, on a journey through Europe, Holland, England, Austria. He wanted to see the modern world with his own eyes, and he wanted no one bowing to him while he did it. The disguise fooled no one. At 6'8", Peter was the tallest man in any room he entered, but Europeans played along, fascinated by this enormous, restless, sometimes terrifying Russian who insisted on doing things himself. In Amsterdam's shipyards, he worked shoulder to shoulder with craftsmen, learning to build ships with his own hands. He wasn't studying power from a distance, he was absorbing it through his skin. In England, King William III gave him a yacht. Peter sailed it himself in a storm, laughing. In Vienna, he studied artillery. In every city, he recruited engineers, architects, naval officers, physicians, anyone who could help him build the Russia he imagined. He returned home with hundreds of European experts, hundreds of revolutionary ideas, and a fury that had been building for 18 months. Because while Peter was gone, the Streltsy had revolted again. Peter cut his tour short. He rode back to Moscow, and what followed was one of the most chilling demonstrations of absolute power in European history. Over 3 months, more than 1,000 Streltsy were interrogated, tortured, and executed. It was a message written in blood. The old Russia was dead. Something new was coming. Peter's great ambition had a single burning focus: the sea. Russia needed a window to Europe, a port on the Baltic, The problem? That coast was controlled by Sweden, then the dominant military power of Northern Europe, led by a young king who had never lost a battle. His name was Charles XII. He was 18 years old, and he was about to make the greatest mistake of his life. In 1700, Peter declared war. The opening result was catastrophic. At the Battle of Narva, Charles XII's 8,000-man army destroyed Peter's force of nearly 40,000. Russian soldiers fled in panic. Their generals surrendered. The cannons were captured. Europe laughed. Sweden's court declared Peter finished. Peter did not accept defeat. He went home and cast 300 new cannons, melting down church bells to make them. He rebuilt his army from scratch with European discipline and European officers. He studied what went wrong at Narva the way a surgeon studies a failed operation. Then he waited. For 9 years, he built. The reckoning came on June 27th, 1709, at Poltava, in what is now Ukraine. Charles XII, exhausted by a brutal winter campaign and cut off from supplies, met Peter's rebuilt army on an open field. What followed was not a battle, it was a demonstration. Within 2 hours, the Swedish army, one of the finest in Europe, ceased to exist as a fighting force. Charles XII fled into exile. He never returned to power. Poltava changed everything. Russia now controlled the Baltic coast. A new city, St. Petersburg, was already rising from the marshes Peter had seized earlier in the war, and on October 22, 1721, the Senate of Russia proclaimed Peter Emperor of all Russia. The Russian Empire was born, not with a crown ceremony but with cannon fire and the screams of a continent that had just been forced to pay attention. Peter died in 1725 at the age of 52. His body had been destroyed by decades of hard drinking, physical labor, and a life lived at full sprint. He died of a bladder infection, the kind of mundane end that felt absurdly small for a man of such colossal force. What he left behind was staggering. A navy of 48 ships of the line and 800 smaller vessels, a modernized army, a new capital that would rival Paris, universities, the Russian Academy of Sciences, an empire 11 time zones wide that would dominate Eurasian politics for the next 2 centuries. But history is not simple. Peter's transformation came at an extraordinary human cost. Hundreds of thousands of serfs died building St. Petersburg, literally worked into the frozen earth. His reforms enriched the nobility and crushed the peasantry. He executed his own son, Alexei, whom he suspected of treason. The Russia he built was modern, powerful, and deeply, systematically brutal. Was he a great man? By any measure of historical impact, yes. Was he a good man? That question 300 years later still has no easy answer. Perhaps that is exactly the point. The greatest forces in history rarely are. They are simply unstoppable. If you want to understand Russia, its ambition, its paranoia, its hunger to be recognized by a world that keeps looking away, start here. Start with Peter. Because in many ways, Russia is still living inside the empire he built. If this story moved you, subscribe, because next week we go inside the war that nearly destroyed everything Peter created. Napoleon thought he could conquer Russia. He was wrong. And the story of how Russia survived is one of the most extraordinary in human history.